Hello and welcome to another episode of the Meet Me in Sacred Space podcast. I am your host, Lori A. Andros. This podcast is a place for you to press pause on the busyness of your day-to-day life. It is a place to discover your voice of inner wisdom, reconnect with your authentic self, and to become the courageous creator of your adventurous, vibrant, and spirit-filled life. In each episode, we will get raw and real, exploring what it means to live a soul-led life. We will talk about sacred practices, ceremony, ritual, and dive into in the now, crystal wisdom and insight. Along the way, you will discover practical ways to bring the sacred into your everyday life. So grab a cup of tea, light a candle, get cozy, and let's dive in. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Meet Me in Sacred Space podcast. Today I have a very special guest with me, Tara Preston. Tara is joining us and we are going to dive into some conversation about embodying our feminine leadership and working with the Akashic Records. I'm so excited about this conversation. I feel like I've been so curious connecting with and following Tara on social media for, I think it's probably close to a decade already. Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm excited to sink into this conversation and see what shows up. We're going to have just a beautiful, free-flowing conversation and sink in that way. But before we dive in, I want to just give you a little bit of background about Tara and about her work and how she shows up in the world. So Tara Preston is a new paradigm feminine leadership, prosperity, and business mentor. She is the founder of the Akashic Women's School. She has a prosperous, freedom-based business where she guides visionary women through major life transformations that pave the way for their next level of sacred prosperity, leadership, and legacy work in the world. She does this by guiding them to root deeply into the power of their divine feminine magic and embrace their power to create life on their terms. Tara helps women shift from old masculinized ways of operating their businesses to ways that align with how they are naturally designed to flourish. Tara has done over 6,000, I just love that, 6,000 Akashic sessions, developing her own method called the Flower of Life Akashic Healing. She is a ritual shamanic artist who, through the past 20 years, has discovered how empowered women feel when they are given space to authentically self-express. Whether that authentic self-expression is through using their voice, claiming their dreams, sharing their gifts, presenting themselves in a way that they feel really expresses their unique essence, truth, and power, or creating sacred programs that capture the many gifts, talents, and wisdom of women in order to experience greater freedom in who they are and the unique contribution of their work. All right, so welcome, Tara.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to connect and dive in today.
Yeah, I'm so excited. This is really, gosh, I'm excited to dive into. It's fun. I was thinking about how a couple weeks ago we had the microphones reversed, and so this feels just really fun to go,
It
to
does.
play on both sides.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So, I want to start this conversation around the divine feminine and really opening up the space. I'm curious about your path to embodying divine feminine in your life and your work, and how that began for you.
Yes. Well, I think for me, the exploration and embodiment of the feminine began, like if I look back on my path, it began quite young. So stepping into professional modeling at the age of 14, and then later becoming a professional makeup artist. And so, the reason that connects to, for me, my feminine path, at a really young age was kind of like the exploration of like beauty, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but I was, as even like a young girl, navigating a lot of illusion around what beauty was. And so there were some initiations there. There was a lot of healing that had to happen, especially later, like on, as I moved into my 30s. And women navigating perfection and limited beauty standards, that's kind of like, it's been a common theme, especially as we, look back over previous decades or generations. And we're starting to see it open up a lot more into like authentic beauty, which is so beautiful. But for me as a young woman, as much as I kind of, enjoyed, part of the creative expression of modeling, it really set me up for like perfection. And yeah, and like that I had to like look a certain way or act a certain way, that I had to, like look pretty or be well behaved. Like there was like a lot of conditioning that kind of like went into that in some subtle ways that followed me around, like into my 20s.
Yeah.
And then I discovered, I felt that a call actually to be a professional makeup artist. And I think there's a lot of layers as to why I was called to be a professional makeup artist. And I was, there was this awakening happening around women's power and beauty, and holding space for that, for other women to feel confident in their beauty. And even as I stepped into makeup artistry, it wasn't necessarily just about like the makeup for me. And actually my style, I was always really known as like a natural makeup artist. And I love that part of my journey. And also there was still this like element of like perfection. And I also started, that was a decade or maybe even 12 years of holding space in that realm for like a lot of women. And I still noticed that under the surface, like there was just so many women didn't really feel beautiful. And it got me questioning, and it was quite frustrating too. And I've always been, drawn to, it's kind of like the dance of like the inner world and the outer world. And so for me, that piece was missing. And I also felt so much of the time women felt so limited in their expression. And so did I still was feeling it a lot at that. I was working for like a lot of high-end beauty lines, and so just that limited sense of like what it meant to be in our full free beauty. And so that's to me like one aspect of the divine feminine is beauty, but not perfect beauty, just right, authentic beauty, and being in the essence and the energy of a deeper beauty, and how that wants to flow through us, and how that wants to be expressed without the limitation and the perfection. So that is where the journey began.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm remembering this as you're speaking. I'm remembering back then that I remember when you began bridging sacred wisdom in with
Yes.
yes, that was that was really beautiful. I love how it's evolved since then. It just feels so natural and organic.
Yeah. And it was like, I started to really, it was shortly after. So it was, I did makeup artistry, and then we had this desire I really wanted to unearth what it meant to live your purpose too. And I felt like that was kind of like a piece that was missing for a lot of women, a disconnect from like a deeper sense of fulfillment and a deeper sense of beauty, and an intrinsic knowing that we were like more than enough. And I just didn't see that. So anyways, felt that call. I'm like, what is my purpose? There has to be more. This is actually like, I'm feeling frustrated. I don't feel like this is truth for me, fully truth. And we made that move to the country. And I really wanted to understand what it meant to live from a space of purpose, and how I could support women in doing that. And that's where I found the Akashic Records. And that kind of started to like weave in a whole other piece. And yeah, it was probably, 2 or 3 years after that, I started to kind of refer to my work and myself as a beauty shaman.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Because it was the soul.
That's what I'm remembering. Yeah.
Yeah. it was the soul level kind of more shamanic aspect that I started to weave into beauty
Right.
and expression for women. So that was a really fun piece of my journey for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that actually, in hearing your story, I'm being reminded of that elegant and artful evolution that you have gone through in your work. And I'm curious, actually, if you have some. I feel like this is a big conversation, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if you have
Yeah.
some thoughts or suggestions or some, yeah, if you could kind of speak to that energy of
Mm-hmm.
artfully allowing expression to evolve, because that's what I've seen you do so beautifully.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Um, Yeah, and I think, that is kind of another aspect, just kind of bringing it back to the divine feminine. And when I think of the divine feminine too, I think of like cycles of transformation. And I
Mhm.
think of a woman's path to awakening. And I think of our evolutionary journey and the feminine life cycles and how this gets to be a journey that constantly, if we're willing to, there's always rest phases and grounding and all of that. And then also, if we're willing to, just like the openness to get curious about where we are, what we're being called into, like what do we desire and what are we feeling that pull to experience or expand into as an extension of our feminine essence and our soulful evolution. And so
Mhm.
for me, it's always been, kind of like that. Once I, move through a cycle of transformation and I get to experience that kind of like grounded expression of my evolution, which is so beautiful because I think, that's where we don't become stagnant. And that's where we are always in this path of healing too. There was a point where I was working with a lot of women moving into the crone phase of their journey, which is so interesting. I'm in my mid 30s and I had a period where I just was so many women in their 50s and their 60s and even in their 70s. It was so
Mhm.
cool. And, one of the things that often they would say, and we're doing such deep work together, is that they just never felt like they had the time or the space to like engage their own journey and
Mhm.
or to move through sometimes life initiations like motherhood or marriage or divorce or career changes, like when we feel that call, or when life kind of when life can be quite challenging. I think oftentimes in our society too, we miss the opportunity to do the deep healing and to engage the cycle of transition, the energy that's present, so that we can do the healing work, but use it to step more fully into the woman that we were born to be. And so, these women were showing up later in life. And so thankfully, they had the courage to look at some of the deep healing that sometimes got missed along their path.
Yeah.
So I think that if we're present with where we're at and what is being asked of us and willing to kind of do the healing work. And when I say the healing work, to me, when I'm feeling that call into more of my evolution, there's always that kind of like layer of like what needs to be released now. Like
Mm.
what healing, or what am I shedding, or what am I letting go of, or what is present that I need to kind of, move through and process in order to create more space for the next evolution of expression that wants to come through.
Mm.
Um,
Beautiful.
yeah. So that was a little bit all over, but I think the
No,
thread
that
is
was
there.
perfect. That was absolutely beautiful. I think you actually touched in, and this episode's actually airing on Mother's Day in the US. So,
Oh
so I'm glad you brought motherhood in, because I know
yeah.
that many of our listeners are mothers, and
Yeah.
this isn't something I can relate to from, the
Hmm.
traditional sense.
Traditional. Yeah.
Yeah, but but I know that this is a big part of your life,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that I feel like you've so beautifully navigated this dance of journeying into self-discovery and living in ways
Hmm.
that your soul is, wanting to be lived, and
Mm-hmm.
while also being a mother. And so I would love if you have some thoughts
Mm-hmm.
around that.
That was like
Okay.
such, that was another one, I talked about feminine life, like the feminine life cycles, right? And working
Yeah.
with the Akashic Records, which we can get into, absolutely. I would find women would show up for the Akashic record work when it was like really pivotal points on their path. And
Hmm.
there was a reason for that. So for me, motherhood was definitely initiation, and I could recognize it as such. And I, again, just, it was a challenge. I had to, like, I was, I had Audrey when I was 31. So I'd had a career. I was a flight attendant for a little while there, like a really free lifestyle
Yeah.
that wasn't so free after she came along. So anyways, I again harnessed the power of transition. And for me at that time too, I was really assessing like what motherhood meant for me. And I really wanted to be the mother who could be an example of what it means to live from a place of purpose. Like for me, I didn't want to have to tell her. I wanted to just be the embodied example of that. And as a young woman, like for me around the age of 18, 17, 18, 19, I did have a, like, I think there was a calling to like pursue like the healer's path. Like I had some niggles about like certain things that I was being called to explore, but I didn't really have like the guidance or the role model.
Right.
Right. So for me, that was really important. And yeah, and so that was the path that I chose to kind of like follow and carve. And it's been, so deep and so rewarding. And I find, working around the feminine too, I've been really asked to, heal some layers of what I would call like the mother wound,
Hmm.
and lineage work, and really being able to hold space for my path and my own healing journey, and what it is I am being an embodied example of.
Hmm. Beautiful. Beautiful. I
Mm-hmm.
love that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I think
So,
I answered the question fully. I
yeah.
feel like there was another piece, but
Yeah, I think oh, I think you did answer it. I think
yeah, okay,
that
good.
yeah, I think a lot of I think a lot of times people feel like they need to choose between one or the other, and I feel like you have found a way to live that, and I think that's really powerful
Yeah,
and beautiful.
I totally. And I think too, for me, it was like, even having a business, it was important for me, like as a mom and as a, sacred business owner, that I did have a business that was like sustainable, that would, you know, feel prosperous, but that would also be spacious. Like that was really important. Like I want to create my life so that
Right.
I do feel passionate on purpose, but I also want it to feel spacious, like being able to be present while I had something that felt very like purposeful to me. Um, was a priority, and it's something that I often help other moms, every other moms who are called to their sacred work, um, really kind of like line up those pieces in the scope of their own expression and the scope of their own business, because um, I do feel that the voice and the vision of mothers is definitely like, it needs to be put at the forefront of our family unit and in our communities. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
thank you.
I think one of the things that I kind of scribbled down in my notes before we connected was,
Mm-hmm.
what does your divine feminine business look like? I think,
Mm-hmm.
one of the phrases you have in
Mm-hmm.
your bio was about shifting from old masculinized ways of operating business into one that's aligned with the natural flow. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of people might be curious about what does that really look like? Like what what does that look
Yeah,
like?
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like a lot of things, I guess, but like for me, it meant, really getting clear about what my creative vision is. you know, who am I being called to be? What is the vision that, you know, the goddess is inspiring, like me? What is the call? And I kind of start there. And it also was like, how do I need and want to show up in my business and my life, which meant I had to design something that would drop me into my power, and something that wouldn't have me going and pushing and doing and kind of like leading from exhaustion, which can be more of like the hyper masculine way. And then also, you know, like believing in my creations. And this is a piece that I often, when I'm working with women too, it's like sometimes like they have an idea or they have like a tool or a process, and they lean into it a little bit more because they feel like it's going to sell, but they don't necessarily trust like the creation or like the beautiful program that wants to like flow through as an extension of like purpose, or like the work that just wants to birth through them. Because traditionally we haven't always married money, is, you probably know, like through the arts, but we haven't always married money to like our feminine gifts or our feminine vision. And so that's a big part of the work that I do, that I had to do myself to really understand how to make money through my feminine gifts, was to really look at how to partner with money as I feel the call to bring through what it is that I want to bring through as a divine feminine woman, who has a vision, who feels an immense amount of purpose, and how to connect money to that. And yeah, I could keep going on, but I'll just check in with you and see that.
I'm just loving this. I'm absolutely loving this, because I think this is another big area for our listeners, you know, bringing their work into the world, bringing their sacred work into the world. And you use the word legacy. And I think, you know, when I was reading through your bio and just kind of letting it land in before we got on this call, that piece of legacy, it just feels like it's so important. And I think you just touched in on it about how the work that many of us are here creating and bringing into form, it has its own life, and it has its own energy that it wants to create, and being able to trust that. I actually would love to hear you speak to that just a little bit more, if that feels aligned.
For sure. Yeah. I feel like this is like such a big gift for you as well, to be able to like follow that energy. I've seen you do it so many times. I'm sure you're one of the people that's inspired me into this path, you know, from that perspective. So, yes, I think that, you know, I guess the piece that I'm wanting to drop into it is, you know, on the awakening, you know, woman's journey, or the awakening being's journey. I always find there's like this point on the sacred path where it's like we're gathering like tools, and we're taking classes, and we're studying this, and we've got like this teacher, and that's a really beautiful point on the path for sure. But then I find underneath there's something deeper, like that often like just wants to come through the channel of the unique expression of like who we are. And, you know, and it starts to kind of like bubble and swirl, and there's just this like consciousness, like something so unique to us that wants to come through us as the extension of like the journey that we've done, and the wisdom that we've accumulated, and the embodied wisdom, like the deeper soul wisdom of who we are. And just kind of like all these elements of like who we are, like just from like our mastery and the path that we've traveled. But, you know, in a deeper, taking that a layer deeper, because this is coming through too. I truly feel that as divine beings, it's like we have access to this like limitless like inner riches and resources that can flow through us if we tap into it and listen to it and trust it enough to bring it through. So when I feel like, you know, like a conscious creation, like brewing, like there's something that wants to come through me as a part of like my legacy work, it's some kind of, I kind of look at it as like the root system of like my business foundation that's going to like hold me as I flourish in my feminine. That's kind of how I look at it. But to bring that through, I just kind of, for me, and just love to kind of like dream into that energy and look at, like, start to feel into, what does want to come through me. And also, in terms of like bringing through our creations, and in terms of the divine feminine and this creative energy, it requires spaciousness and receptivity. And it requires, just allowing ourselves to receive it and dream into it. And and then from there, that's kind of like, where I find like the more the masculine energy can come through and start to meet the creation energy in terms of how it wants to be grounded, and how this beautiful, maybe sacred body of work wants to be held as it's birthed into the physical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the way you just laid that out, because I think sometimes we get those. One of the things I see as a challenge is that there's the learning phase sometimes isn't honored as the learning phase. Like it's grabbed and immediately tried to share, but it hasn't had time to integrate. And I think this is I'm really glad that you identified that, because the learning phase, to me, I when I look at it, I always feel like that learning phase is a place where we open up the space to attune to what is that deeper piece that is going to want to come through. And I think it's such a powerful phrase, but we have to give it its time to like really fully embody. And there is so much delight and fun in that phase to me. I always think it's a really fun phase to like indulge the learning aspect. Yeah.
It totally is. And then you often hear, well, for me anyways, I often, because women will, that's just primarily who I work with, but women will often like, I just know there's more. Like, I just know there's more.
And there is, because it needs to come from within you.
Yes, exactly. Yes, totally. Exactly. The way is within. Absolutely. Yeah. It is.
I always find it so fun that the teaching place, and then also the holding space for what wants to come after that, because what wants to come after that is always different. It's not more information. It's about something from within. So exciting. I'm glad you brought voice to that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so the next place I really want to go, Tara, is into the Akashic Records. I'm just like so hungry to hear you speak about them. So I'm just going to open it up from there.
Yeah, I can start in. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the Akashic Records are, I think, pretty remarkable. They're very exciting, I think. I mean, we're hearing about the Akashic Records more and more now, and I think that's really beautiful. And I also feel like it's like a new frontier. I think there's a lot more that will open up from that area of study. But yes, I found the Akashic Records 11 years ago. And like I said, I've done, so many Akashic Record sessions, and they really spoke to me because of how ancient they were. I feel like the Akashic Records are one of, or if not, like the deepest healing tool. This is the deepest layer of healing on the planet, because when you work with the Akashic Records, you're working with the soul. You're working at the level of soul. And so I'm like, there's so many pieces I want to weave in right now. You're working at the level of soul. But I'll give like a little bit of a definition, just a little bit, for those that maybe are like, "Ooh, what's the Akashic Records?" Yeah. And the Akashic Records are basically like an invisible field of information that sit fifth dimensionally. I'm just going to start there and kind of just break it down. So an invisible field that sits fifth dimensionally. So the body's like the 3D, right? And then our emotions and our thoughts are like fourth dimension. Can't see them, but we know that they're there. And then the Akashic Records sit fifth dimensionally. And the Akashic Records existed kind of like well before the history of Earth. Like, they're ancient, and it's this invisible field of information that records, and it's recorded, the Akashic Records. And I work with the Akasha too, the Akashic field, and they're slightly different, but the Akashic Records record, and they record every memory, every choice point, every thought, every experience, every event that's ever unfolded like throughout history. It's a vast, vast field of information. So a lot of people will see the Akashic Records, and sometimes I do, as like a really vast like library, like full of like books and recorded information. And the Akashic Records, like I said, sit fifth dimensionally. They're held at the level of soul, but they also sit at the level of the cells and the subconscious. So the Akashic Records are actually held at the level of the body too. But
Interesting.
it's so fascinating. So when I am working, so every soul has its own Akashic record. So we all have our Akashic record, but so does like every piece of land. Like when you were on my podcast, you were talking about your trip to Peru and the Akashic records in the mountains. So it's like, every piece of land has its own Akashic record, every, animal, essentially every pet. And so do we. So we all have this, like, some like cultures would refer to it as like the book of life. Like we each have our book. So and this is based on the idea that the soul is so much older than this physical life experience. And so a lot of people will resonate with that. And I've had clients who don't necessarily resonate with past lifetimes, and yet they still walk away from their session kind of like, oh my gosh, that was like brought up so much and it was so accurate, and like, wow. So a lot of times in our present lifetime experience, when we can kind of like feel stuck, or we're pushing up against like patterns that we just know don't support our soulful evolution. And this is like, where it comes back to kind of like transformation and feeling that call and saying yes to soul. When we say yes to soul and we're ready to grow and we're ready to ground more of our soul in the physical experience and be soul led, oftentimes there's like karmic gunk, right? From like, different past life experiences that we've had from different choices that we've made. This is experience. This is not experience. This is important to the choices, because the choice really, whether it's a negative choice or a positive choice, that really determines like where and why the block was created. I'll touch on that in a little bit, but when we're in this present experience and we're kind of hitting up against those karmic layers that don't serve our evolution, and they can affect us in, any area of life. It can be around relationships. It can be around money. It can be around legacy. It can be around, a lot of times I'm working like around like feminine trauma or the witch wound, pieces like that.
Yeah.
And now with so many sessions, it's like been fascinating to see even just like the role of like mother and like a lot of like the societal programming that's carried forward. Actually, it's like, it's to unearth it in past lifetimes is like so cool. Yeah. So yeah, go ahead. Do you have a question?
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kind of letting it sink in. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And I just want to bring it back to this, like the choice point piece, because we do, we live in this universe of free will and free choice. And so when we have, let's say, a past life experience, it can be a choice. It can be, unconscious or conscious choice. And because a lot of times choices are made out of like fear, and sometimes even like fear of death. But, a negative choice is really just that choice point that takes us out of alignment with our true divine nature and power. So it's almost like where we sometimes give away like our sovereignty, or, really make a choice out of like disempowerment, rather than making like a positive choice, which, aligns us to our divine nature and our divine power and our divine expression. So when we've made those negative choices, and we don't need to judge it, because sometimes we make, negative choices because the soul actually really just desires the experience of the negative consequence. That can happen too. Yeah. And so and so there could be, just a common example would be like, being burnt at the stake for speaking your truth. And, like where there may have been a choice point to take a vow to like never, speak your truth again. Done so out of fear, maybe partly unconscious, but that gets carried forward into our present lifetime experience. And if we're being called to be like a spiritual teacher, or, just to like in term, even marketing or sharing a message, sometimes, that those kinds of like karmic, patterns and pain bodies can be really prominent and can really affect us. But the beautiful thing is when we're working with the Akashic Records, we get right to the very root, the soul level root of a deep karmic pattern that's playing out present lifetime, that oftentimes, women who have done a lot of work on their path, they're like, I have been working at this and seen so many healers and done. I can't get to the root of this.
Yeah.
And then, and then with the Akashic Records, we go in and we just get to like the very, very soul level root of it. And they move forward from it once and for all. So that's kind of like, the surface of it, really. Yeah,
that's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm just thinking, I'm like listening and feeling into this, and I'm like, I think it might be time for another Akashic Records session. That would be really nice.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is there? Yeah.
I'll
hand it over to you if you want. Yeah, I was just going to say if there's anything else that you wanted me to speak on. I'm not sure how we're doing for time. I think that went by so fast.
I know, it did. It really did. It definitely, it flowed really quickly. I think you've covered so much today. It's been absolutely beautiful. And
thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. That piece of the Akashic Records and the ways that actually ties in with what we were talking about with legacy work and the arc of the woman's journey and from awakening and embodiment and all the different cycles. I feel like it's so beautiful, full circle. And as we come to a close, I am curious. Because it is Mother's Day, and there is that energy of the divine feminine and the ways that the archetype and the energy of the mother lives within all of us. If there's anything you would like to leave us with around that.
Yes. Well, I would probably say, a good question to kind of come back to is, where do you need mothering? Like, I think it's like so important for mothers to remember that sometimes we need mothering. We also have kind of, more tender, vulnerable, aspects to our internal world. And part of, healing the mother wound, which I didn't get very much into, but is just taking those sacred pauses, right? To listen and to connect and just like, where am I needing like unconditional love? Like, where am I needing nurturing and where can I bring beauty to myself right now? So yeah.
Beautiful. That's absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
And so, Tara, tell people where they can learn more about you and about your free gift.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can learn more about me at tarapreston.com, and the Akashic Records. If any of that's speaking to you, you can learn more about that at the akashicwomenschool.com. And then there's the free gift for anyone who may want a bit of an introduction, but in a very beautiful and deep way. There's a 21-day Akashic Heart Center journaling practice, and you can access that at the akashicwomenschool.com/Akashic Journal.
Beautiful. This is
well, thank you so much, and thanks to your listeners for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So much fun. Thank you, Tara. All right, sacred friends, have a wonderful day, and check out Tara's websites. She's just amazing and inspiring, and I feel so deeply honored that she joined us for this episode. Have a beautiful day. Shine brightly.